One day after releasing a budget that fiscal austere Republicans scoffed at, President Trump taking on the establishment. We're talking about the establishment Republicans, this time on trade. President Trump doubling down on possibly imposing tariffs and a reciprocal tax despite opposition from his fellow Republicans. Roll tape.
And I think we should have a reciprocal tax. That's called fair trade. It's called free trade, because ultimately what's going to happen, either we'll collect the same that they're collecting, or probably what happens is they'll end up not charging a tax and we won't have a tax. And that becomes free trade.
So what's more important for the Republicans as we head into the midterm elections? Profits for the elites or jobs for Americans? Here to discuss, Tammy Bruce, Fox News political contributor, also a Washington Times columnist, and Capri Cafaro, former Ohio State Senate minority leader, currently Washington Examiner contributor as well. Let me start with you, Tammy. I was really shocked. Maybe I shouldn't have been, but this, first of all, I love when President Trump has these open meetings so the world can watch. I love it. Everyone's on the record. You have a chance to push back. He's not hostile. But he had the most opposition from his own political party. And he had to say to them, he more or less put it out there, okay, so here's the equation. Cheaper imported dumped steel from China means less jobs in America. Higher domestically produced steel in America means more jobs. Which one do you want?
Right. I mean, his framing is great. So he's a businessman. He knows if he's looking at America as a company, what's going to be best. America first, but not America alone. A fairness dynamic. But we shouldn't be surprised at this. His election was not about really a GOP victory. This was about a victory for the people, right? And this is playing out. It's the perfect microcosm of an example of the nature of what Trump represents. And I would say, though, that it doesn't have to be that kind of a dichotomy. I think we can have, obviously, profits for corporations, maybe not as much or as quickly, and have jobs, especially with his expansion on the ground and dealing with creating a fair trade dynamic for everyone as well.
Now, Capri, the flip side of this was you actually had Senator Sherrod Brown and Wyden seeming like they were more on the same page as President Trump to some of his fellow Republicans, and also even extending an olive branch saying, hey, we could probably work something out in infrastructure as well. It was almost like being in a bizarro world.
Well, look, I mean, President Trump, this is what he ran on. This is how he won in places like my Ohio and Sherrod Brown's Ohio, because the people that we worked for in the Buckeye State were really drawn to President Trump because of his very firm words on trade, on NAFTA, on things like steel dumping and currency manipulation in particular. So, you know, these are things, and I give Sherrod Brown credit because, you know, he has stayed true to his principles. The issue of steel dumping and, you know, fighting against, you know, the depression of steel prices, because, you know, that's something that actually impacts Ohio, something that he's stuck with. And if he's willing to work with President Trump, I think that's something that benefits Ohio and the rest of the country. But this is really a true dichotomy, I think, between sort of the traditional Roy Blunts of Missouri, GOP establishment,
it's establishment
NFIB
period,
chambers.
right? Let's be honest. This was really about the establishment being taken to school by President Trump in front of the world, and they're not. I think a lot of them miss it. Listen, Pat Toomey, for instance. Yeah. He pushed back really hard against President Trump. He said, well, you know, imported steel is only 16%. Of that, China's only 2%. You had yet another person in the room that says in his own state, there's a steel company that makes very sensitive electronic steel that we never want to have to import from China. Never want to have to import from anyone, but specifically China, Tammy. And yet he pushed back, almost saying that this was a non-event, despite the fact that by the time President Trump came into office, we lost over 7 million manufacturing jobs. And we've been lucky enough to get 200,000 of them back in the first year.
Yeah, and the president also couched this to a degree appropriately as a national security issue. That's right. That the world is moving toward war effectively. We see this, of course, with what's going on with Israel and Iran, et cetera. Russia will be involved in that. China obviously is finishing up its militarization of the entire China Sea. Right. So it's important, I think, and the president has made this point, that this is on the larger issue also of national security. But this is really the beginning, and it's not. He's come out this week with a variety of new ideas. This is challenging the establishment to think differently, to think for the American people, not necessarily just for the lobbyists, and to come out of that box, whether it was, of course, the food stamp idea, this idea, the tax reform, all of it is new and all of it is good.
Capri?
Can I just chime in real quick and go back to the issue of national security? Because I think this is one that is very interesting. It's my understanding that the Trump administration is looking to utilize a kind of and dust off an old law. I believe it's the Tariff Act of of 1930 that basically says that we're allowed to levy tariffs in the context of national security. And, I think this is a very interesting tool because, traditionally economists and policymakers would say that you can't do this kind of thing because it's in straight violation of the WTO. The Trump administration is saying, we don't care. And again, that's what people in the middle of the country say, great, don't care. Let's mess with the WTO and let's figure out a way to actually have bilateral trade agreements that work for us and work for American workers rather than, kowtowing to some kind of a multinational trade, agreement that really is not helping us. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of tools they come up with and what the international, sort of trade dynamics are.
Well, this is all due to Trump, though. This is all Trump.
And he's firing in salvos. That would be Section 332 of the Tariffs Act of 1930. And believe me, I think the American public was listening. If those lawmakers weren't, they were making a big mistake. Ladies, thank you very much.
Agreed.